My parents told me they didn't owe me anything, so I made sure they got exactly that when they needed me. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, my parents have treated me like a burden they were forced to carry. I wasn't born into a warm or affectionate family. My earliest memories aren't of bedtime stories or birthday parties. They're of my mother sighing when I entered the room, and my father reminding me that children cost money. Love in our house came with conditions, and somehow I never met any of them. Lily, my younger sister, was everything they wanted me to be. When she got a C on her report card, they called her creative. When I got an A, they said, "That's what you're supposed to do." I used to sit at the dinner table, watching my father beam at her as she talked about her day, and I'd wonder what I was doing wrong. I could have sworn I saw my reflection in the window once small, quiet, fading into the wallpaper behind them. One afternoon when I was around 10, I showed my mom a certificate I'd won at school, first place science project. She looked at it for 2 seconds and said, "That's nice. Did you clean your room?" I laughed it off, but later that night, I heard her bragging to a neighbor about Lily's drawing competition. The bitterness started to grow then, quietly. Like rust beneath paint, my parents often told me, "We gave you food and shelter, what more do you want?" And I used to believe them that love was a luxury, not a right. I thought if I just worked harder, they'd notice me. But the harder I tried, the colder they got. Looking back now, that's the moment I learned how deeply unfair family could be. I didn't know it then, but those small moments of neglect were laying the foundation for everything that would come later. Everything that would change the way I saw them forever. Growing up, I learned that in my house, guilt didn't need evidence, it just needed me. If something broke, it was my fault. If Lily cried, I must have made her. My mother had a way of twisting every situation so that I was the one apologizing, even when I didn't understand what I was apologizing for. I used to stand there, small and confused, watching her point at me while saying, "Why can't you just behave like your sister?" Once, Lily spilled orange juice on Dad's laptop. I was outside when it happened, but when he came home and saw the damage, his first words were, "What did you do this time?" No one cared that I said. I didn't even touch it. His hand came down fast, not hard enough to leave a mark, but enough to leave a memory. Later that night, I heard Lily whisper, "I'm sorry," from her room, and for a second, I hated her not because of what she did, but because she could make mistakes and still be forgiven. I started to internalize it all. Maybe I really was the problem. Maybe something about me just invited disappointment. My mother's eyes had this permanent look of annoyance when she looked at me, like I was an unfinished chore she couldn't get rid of. My father rarely spoke unless it was to criticize or correct. "Stop slouching. Don't talk back. Try harder." The words became the soundtrack of my childhood. Sometimes at night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out what made Lily lovable and me disposable. I told myself that one day, when I was old enough to leave, I'd never look back. But deep down, a part of me still hoped they'd notice I was hurting, that they'd see how much I wanted to be loved. Of course, they never did. And what came next only made that truth harder to ignore. When I finally turned 18, it felt like I'd been holding my breath for years, and I could finally exhale. I packed everything I owned into 2 old suitcases and left for college the same week I graduated high school. My parents didn't throw me a party, didn't even drive me to campus. My mom handed me a crumpled $50 bill and said, "Don't call us for money. We've done enough." My dad didn't say a word, just gave a stiff nod like he was signing off on a business transaction. That was their version of goodbye. College was rough at first. I didn't have family money or anyone to call when things got tight. I worked in the campus library during the day and took shifts at a gas station on weekends. There were nights I'd skip dinner just to make rent, but strangely, I didn't mind. For the first time in my life, the silence around me wasn't hostile, it was peaceful. No yelling, no comparisons, no guilt. Just me and the sound of my own effort. I remember one winter night, walking back to my dorm after work, snow crunching under my shoes, my breath turning to fog in the air. My fingers were numb, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years. The kind that comes from realizing no one can hurt you anymore because you've stopped expecting them to care. I called home a few times, mostly out of habit. Every conversation was short. My mom would ask, "Still working?" And when I said yes, She'd say, "Good, you should." Then she'd hang up. "No, I miss you. No, how are you holding up?" Just an endless transactional coldness. That's when I stopped calling altogether. I told myself they'd never notice anyway, and for a while, it felt like peace until success started to find me, and their silence began to mean something entirely different. By my mid-20s, I had carved out a life that didn't need them. I'd finished my degree, landed a stable IT job, and was renting a decent apartment downtown. For the first time, I could afford things without worrying whether it made me ungrateful. Every small victory, every new milestone felt like proof that I'd survived their indifference. But success is strange. It doesn't erase the past. It just puts a spotlight on who still doesn't clap for you. When I bought my first house, I sent my parents a picture. It wasn't about showing off, I just wanted to share something good. My mom replied a week later with, "Good for you. I guess all that studying finally paid off." No congratulations, no warmth. My father never responded at all. I stared at that message for a long time, wondering how people could sound jealous of their own child. Meanwhile, Lily's life was chaos. She'd married young, divorced even younger. And somehow my parents always bailed her out helping with rent, buying her new furniture, even paying off her credit card debt. When I asked once if they ever planned to help me with something, my mother laughed. "You don't need us. You've always been fine on your own." The irony hit me like a punch. I'd become self-sufficient because they forced me to. There were nights I'd sit alone on my couch, scrolling through old photos of U.S. family vacations. Birthdays, and I'd notice how every picture told the same story. Them smiling at Lily, and me standing somewhere in the background, half cropped out, like an afterthought. I guess some roles never change. That's when I stopped trying to prove anything. If they couldn't see who I was now, they never would. But cutting off emotional ties doesn't mean the wound heals. It just stops bleeding in public. I thought distance would make me free. I didn't know it was just the calm before the next storm, one that would test how far I was willing to go to protect my peace. Just when life started feeling stable, Lily came back into it like a storm that didn't knock before entering. She called me one evening, her tone all sugar and nostalgia. "Hey, big brother, it's been forever. How are you?" I knew that tone. It wasn't warmth, it was strategy. Within minutes, she was hinting at her temporary money problems. Rent was due, her car payment was behind, and she just needed a little help to get through the month. Against my better judgment, I helped. I transferred some money, told her it was the last time. She sent a bunch of heart emojis and said, "You're the best. I'll pay you back soon." Of course, she never did. A few weeks later, another call came this time. It wasn't so sweet. She sounded frantic, saying, "Mom and Dad said you're doing really well. Don't be stingy. You know they'd help me if they could." That hit differently. It wasn't a request, it was an expectation, like my success was a family resource to be mined. I told her no that time. I'd already given enough emotionally, financially, everything. The silence on the line turned sharp. "Wow," she said coldly, "you've changed. You're so selfish now. No wonder Mom and Dad said you only think about yourself." That line, it burned. Not because it was true, but because it proved that nothing had changed. My parents were still running the same playbook, painting me as the villain, so they could feel justified in needing me only when it was convenient. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, feeling that old ache creep back in. For years, I'd worked to build walls high enough to keep their toxicity out, but somehow they still found a way through. And deep down, I knew this was leading somewhere. Families like mine never take no as an answer. They take it as a challenge. It happened during what was supposed to be a family dinner. Lily had guilt-tripped me into coming, saying Mom missed me and wanted to reconnect. Against my instincts, I agreed. The moment I walked in, I could tell it wasn't about reconciliation. It was an ambush disguised as a meal. The tension was thick enough to taste. My father sat at the head of the table, silent but watchful, while my mother forced small talk like a salesman pitching nostalgia. Halfway through dinner, Lily brought it up. "You know," she said with a smug smile, "it's weird that you never help out anymore. You make so much money, but you act like we're strangers." My fork froze midair. My mother sighed dramatically and said, "She's right. We raised you, gave you everything. Now you act like you don't owe your family anything." Something in me snapped. Maybe it was the years of swallowed anger, or maybe it was hearing them twist, raising me into a debt I was supposed to repay. I put my fork down and looked my father in the eyes. "You're right," I said quietly. "You don't owe me anything, and I don't owe you either." The silence that followed was suffocating. My mother's face turned red. Lily looked shocked, like I'd just cursed in church. My father finally spoke. "Watch your tone. We're still your parents." I leaned back in my chair. Parents love their kids because they want to. You loved me because you thought you had to. There's a difference. My mom pushed her plate away and muttered, "Ungrateful," just like we started. Lily started defending them, throwing words like cold and heartless at me, but I didn't argue. I just stood up, left my share of the bill, and walked out. Outside, the night air was cold, but it felt cleaner than the air inside that house. For the first time, I wasn't just escaping, I was done. I didn't know it yet. But that dinner was the last time I'd see them as family. The next time we'd meet, it would be under entirely different circumstances. After that dinner, I went completely no contact. No calls, no messages, no holidays. I blocked their numbers and changed mine soon after. At first, the silence was deafening. I'd been conditioned my whole life to feel guilty for protecting myself. But slowly, that guilt turned into peace. I started sleeping better, eating better, even smiling more. It's strange how much lighter life feels when you stop trying to earn love that was never meant to be given. The years that followed were good ones. I got promoted, bought a nicer car, and traveled for the first time in my life. I met people who treated me like family without sharing a drop of blood, friends who listened when I spoke, who celebrated my wins without resentment. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. I didn't have to prove my worth every day just to be tolerated. Sometimes, I'd get glimpses of my old life through social media. Lily's endless posts about family first, her expensive gifts, her vacations all paid for. I later learned by my parents, they were still funding her life like she was a permanent child. I'd scroll through those posts with a mix of disbelief and quiet amusement. They hadn't changed at all. If anything, the roles were now exaggerated: Lily, the dependent princess, and my parents, her ever-faithful servants. I told myself I'd never get pulled back into that cycle again. I had built something beautiful from the ruins they left behind, and I wasn't going to let them take that from me. But life has a funny way of testing your resolve. It was 5 years later, late one evening, when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it until I saw the name that appeared on my screen. It was Lily, and the moment I answered, I knew peace was about to end. Lily's voice trembled on the other end of the line. "It's Dad. He's in the hospital." For a second, I didn't react. My mind was blank, like my brain had shut down to protect me from old wounds reopening. She continued, words tumbling out between sobs. "He had a stroke. Tay, Mom's a mess. They don't have the money for the bills, and I can't handle this alone. Please, can you come?" The request hung in the air like a trap, dressed as compassion. My chest tightened not out of affection, but confusion. I didn't wish them harm, but I also couldn't ignore the irony. The same people who once told me they didn't owe me anything were now calling because they needed something from me. I sat in silence for a while before answering. "Why me? You've always been their favorite," she sniffled. "Because you're the only one who can help." That sentence echoed in my head long after I hung up. I spent the night pacing, torn between two sides of myself. The son who had always wanted to be loved was whispering, "Go see them." The man they created, the one hardened by neglect, was saying, "Don't fall for it." By morning, I decided I'd go. Not because they deserved it, but because I needed closure. I told myself I'd visit, see the situation, and decide from there. But the truth was simpler. Some part of me still wanted to see if they'd changed. Maybe age had softened them. Maybe life had humbled them. As I drove to the hospital that afternoon, I could feel my pulse in my throat. The smell of antiseptic hit me the moment I walked in, and memories flooded back of scraped knees, ignored tears, and empty reassurances. I found their room number and paused outside the door, hand trembling on the handle. I wasn't ready for what waited inside. The moment I stepped into the hospital room, time seemed to slow. My father was lying in bed, frail and pale, tubes running from his arms. My mother sat beside him, eyes swollen from crying, her fingers nervously fidgeting with the tissue. For a second, I didn't recognize them. They looked smaller, weaker, like the power they once held over me had evaporated with age. When my mother saw me, she gasped. "You came." Her voice cracked, soft but heavy with guilt or maybe fear. I stood there awkwardly, unsure what to feel. Pity, anger, closure. All of it swirled together until I could barely breathe. She reached for my hand, but I didn't move. "We need you, son," she whispered. "Please, help us. The bills are piling up, and Lily can't manage everything." My father stirred, opening his eyes just long enough to croak, "You can afford it, can't you?" His tone was the same authoritative, dismissive, as if I were still a child being ordered to clean up his mess. That was the moment everything inside me crystallized. They hadn't changed, not even close. The desperation in their eyes wasn't love, it was dependency. They needed me not because they cared, but because they had no one else left. I swallowed hard, my voice calm but shaking. "You told me once that you didn't owe me anything, and you were right. You don't, but I don't owe you either." My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. Lily started to say something, but I didn't wait to hear it. I turned and walked out of that room, my footsteps echoing down the corridor like a heartbeat, finally steadying itself. Outside, the evening air was cold. I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the hospital lights in the rearview mirror. For years, I'd imagined this moment, what it would feel like to finally stand up for myself. It didn't feel triumphant, it felt empty. But sometimes, emptiness is the first real taste of freedom. In the days that followed, my phone became a war zone of missed calls and guilt-laden messages. First from Lily, then from my mother. Each voicemail sounded like a performanza, carefully crafted blend of tears and manipulation. How could you walk away from your own family? Dad could die, and you'll have to live with that. You've become so cold, so heartless. I listened to one, maybe two, before deleting the rest. I wasn't angry anymore, just done. Then the silence came. No calls, no updates. For the first time in my life, they were the ones waiting on me. It was unsettling at first. I kept expecting the guilt to return, the urge to fix things to gnaw at me. But it never did. Instead, there was peace. Quiet, still, foreign peace. A few weeks later, I heard through a mutual acquaintance that my parents had sold their house. The medical bills had drained their savings, and Lily had moved back in with them to help, which I knew really meant being taken care of again. A twisted part of me wanted to feel sorry for them, but another part, the honest part, felt relief. Maybe for the first time, they were living the consequences of their choices. At work, I started performing better. My boss even commented, "You seem lighter lately." He had no idea. For the first time, I wasn't chasing anyone's approval. Every success belonged entirely to me, untainted by guilt or expectation. Sometimes, late at night, I'd think about calling to check in, just to see if they were okay. But then I'd remember all the years I spent trying to earn love that never came and I'd let the thought fade away. They once taught me that love was conditional. I guess I finally believed them, and yet deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Because closure, like family, has a strange way of returning when you least expect it. Months passed. Life moved forward in quiet, measured steps. I focused on work, went to the gym, and even started therapies, something the old me would have never considered. My therapist once asked, "Do you think you're angry or just sad that they'll never be who you needed them to be?" That question stuck with me for weeks. I wasn't angry anymore. I was grieving something that never really existed. Family that looked whole from the outside but was hollow at its core. Then, one evening, while sorting through some mail, I came across a charity flyer for a senior assistance program, an organization that helped low-income elderly couples with groceries, bills, and medical expenses. I stared at it for a long time, that familiar ache stirring in my chest. I knew what I wanted to do before I even finished reading the pamphlet. A week later, I arranged for an anonymous donation enough to cover several months of expenses. I included a note with their address written on it, ensuring the organization would reach out to my parents without ever revealing who made the payment. It wasn't forgiveness. Not really. It was release. I didn't want their gratitude. I didn't want reconciliation. I just didn't want to be haunted by the version of myself that still needed them to say, "We're proud of you," because that version deserved peace, even if they couldn't give it to him. A month later, Lily posted something online, Some kind stranger's been helping my parents through hard times. There are good people left in this world. I read that line 3 times, feeling something tighten and then loosen inside me. I didn't comment, didn't reach out, just smiled faintly, closed my laptop, and went back to my evening. Because, finally, for the first time in my life, I didn't need to be seen to matter. Years later, I sometimes find myself driving past the old neighborhood, the one that used to suffocate me. The streets look smaller now, the houses more worn down than I remember. Time has a way of shrinking things you've outgrown. I don't stop, but I glance toward the street where we used to live. The curtains are drawn, the lawn untended. It's strange this house once felt like the center of my universe, yet now it's just another address in a city that moved on. I've learned something through all this. Love isn't about blood, and family isn't always who raised you. It's who shows up when you need them, who listens without judgment, who chooses you even when it's inconvenient. I found my family in the friends who supported me through years of silence, the mentor who pushed me to grow, the woman I eventually married, someone who loves me without conditions or debts. Sometimes people ask if I regret not reconciling before my parents passed. The answer is complicated. I don't celebrate their absence, but I don't mourn it either. I mourn what could have been the parents I wished I'd had, but the truth is, they gave me something in their own cruel way. The strength to break the cycle, to never make anyone else feel as unwanted as I once did. I still think about that one sentence sometimes. We don't owe you anything. It used to feel like a knife. Now, it feels like freedom. They were right, they didn't owe me, but they never understood that I didn't owe them either. I gave them exactly what they gave me, nothing. And in that nothingness, I found everything I'd ever been searching for: peace, self-worth, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I finally chose myself.